listening to Awake Radio, straight talk for the awake and aware.
No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes in association with Sovereign Independent UK and One World Chronicle. Wake up!
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 20th of February 2014, and a bit of a change tonight. We were down at the Atos Demo in London yesterday, where I had the good fortune or bad fortune, depending on your point of view, of bumping into Natalie Bennett and putting a few questions to her which she couldn't possibly answer, and ended up ripping the mic off and storming off, which was kind of mission accomplished as far as I was concerned. But we're going to first play, I think there's maybe half a dozen or more interviews we did with people at the Atos Demo. The first one's Dave introducing the day, and this goes on for about 7.5 minutes with a couple of other interviews on it, and then we'll just take it from there, and we'll end up with Natalie Bennett later on. And after that, I interviewed Chris Booker of the Telegraph today for about half an hour or so, and we'll be playing that later on this evening, talking about the floods in Somerset. So we'll just introduce the first video, and I think it's Dave Edens up first, just telling people why we're there.
Hi, my name's Jessica McCarnan, and I'm here today to represent Unite Communities and WeWillBeHeard.org. I believe many of us have a powerful message to bring to the public of the UK. I believe there's a special way that we can deliver this message, and it's very important how we do this, because if we don't do it in a particular way, the public will never learn. At the end of the day, if we can get this message to travel across, then we will get support for everyone that needs it right now. We need to unite for the families that need us due to the effects of Atos in our nation. 10,600 people have died within 6 weeks of their benefit being taken away, and then the government stopped counting. And that's why we're doing a balloon release today in memory of these people, and specifically the colour of yellow for Mandy Williams, who was a wonderful woman. I need people to follow suit and to stand up in solidarity for all the families that have lost their loved ones, their sisters, their brothers. Even husbands and wives have died because of the effects of this company and our government. Please stand with us in solidarity. Love and peace and respect to you. Thank you.
My name's Richard. I've come along to the Atos protest here this morning. Basically because my wife was assessed by Atos, and they assessed her as being fit for work. The reason why this is worthy of comment is because not only was my wife not fit for work, my wife was suicidally depressed. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder about 15 years ago and was always comfortable on the medication that she was taking. It kept her within a sort of bracket, if you like, and although she would be like high and low within that bracket, generally she was fine and she could live a productive existence. She was working, she was sociable, very gregarious, everyone liked her. And then for whatever reason, some psychopharmaceutical reason, she started getting depressed. Then she got more and more depressed. As a consequence of her being depressed, she lost her job. So she claimed benefits, and because she claimed benefits, Atos wanted to assess her to make sure that she deserved the benefits. I couldn't take her to the assessment because I was working, but her mum could. So her mum took her along to the assessment centre. And in the assessment, she was assessed by a lady who I think might have been a GP. So she was just moonlighting on a private contract, who knows. But because she turned up for the interview, that was a mark against her. And because she was, reasonably well dressed, that was a mark against her. But the real story was that she was crying throughout pretty much the whole interview. She couldn't make eye contact throughout the whole interview. And the assessor kind of saw all this, and also she made the point to the assessor that she got a huge sheaf of papers from the community mental health team, from the psychiatrist and the psychiatric nurse, to say that she was completely unfit for work. She should be given every due help to try and get healthy. But Atos refused to take this as a matter of principle. So a couple of weeks later, when we got a letter saying that you've been assessed as being fit for work, my wife heard this as Atos saying to her, or the government saying to her, you're a scrounger and you don't deserve benefits. In fact, you don't deserve anything. So my wife went up the high street. She went to 3 different pharmacies. She bought, probably getting on for 150 paracetamol, and she was in the process of taking them when I found her. So she was looked after by mum and dad while I went out to work, and we started the process of appealing against the decision. And we appealed at every step of the way, so we never took no for an answer. And then finally, we were invited to appear in front of a tribunal to say why we thought my wife deserved benefits. So we got dressed up, all nice and smart, and I was going to stand there in front of the tribunal, and for the first time in the whole process, I was going to get a chance to put my story. And then the phone rang, just as we were about to go out of the door. And I answered the phone, and it said, this is a tribunal's process. Your appeal has been upheld, and then they hung up. But what they don't see from the process of starting the appeal until the appeal being concluded is all the hurt and the pain that are involved in that. And that hurt and that pain is immense. You had somebody who's a productive member of society who had just temporarily got ill, who was just treated like a criminal by the system. I've got to tell you now, I'm a white middle-class bloke. I'm completely inoffensive. I've never taken a political stand, I've never done anything insurrectionary or anything against the government at all. And if white middle-class people can be abused by this system and so traduced by it that they feel like they want to protest, then God only knows how you feel. If you're on the bottom of the pile and you don't have a voice, what do? Where do you go? You go nowhere. Huge numbers of people since this process started have committed suicide. Huge numbers of people since this process started have died while having been assessed fit. That to me just seems like an incredible indictment of this system. There needs to be something in place which is much more humane than what exists at present. You should be either assessed by your GP or you should be assessed by somebody who genuinely has a relationship with you and understands all the stress that you're under. Otherwise, how can they possibly hope to make an informed decision? My wife was assessed by somebody who knew her in this world for exactly 20 minutes. How on earth can somebody who knows you for 20 minutes decide whether or not you're fit for work? To me, that seems iniquitous. It seems monstrously unfair, and it almost seems designed to punish the people who need society's help. I think it was Nye Bevan who said that anybody who gets ill doesn't need censure, they need caring for by the whole community. It is everybody's responsibility in this society to make sure that people who are ill and unable to work are cared for and supported. If they can go back to work, great, and if they can't, well, that's fine as well, but we need to support them.
I'm Helena Hamilton. I'm here today to represent my friend Chris Mansell, who was murdered by Atos last year. He was a neighbour of mine, and I first became aware of his condition when he knocked on my door to ask to borrow my printer, because his disability living allowance was taken away, even though he was suffering from cancer of the throat, and he was declared fit to work by Atos. This was January, and by April he was dead. It turned out that when he died, he had the cancer of his throat had travelled to his kidneys and to his liver, and on his death certificate it stated that he had 4 different types of cancer. From the moment his disability living allowance was removed, he ended up in hospital. So instead of him having the last few remaining months of his life at home with palliative care surrounded by his friends and family, he was in hospital in a sterile room, not seeing his friends and family. The stress on his partner Linda was just awful to see, because she had to look after her granddaughter, carry on with her job, as well as going to see him every day. And the uncaring, unfeeling letters that were coming from Atos was heartbreaking. And to end all that, even afterwards, we couldn't even get any money to bury him from the social fund. They made his life and Linda's a living hell. And to say that he was fit enough to work with cancer, I just don't know how they can justify that. It was downright murder. And since then, they've murdered 16,000 people. And Ian Demented, Duncan Smith and Ava McVile are so ashamed of themselves now that they can't even count the figures. Yeah.
Okay, welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio. You heard there Dave Eden and I think it was Andy Green of People Against Cuts, I think. Well, I'm not sure, maybe we played the wrong video, I'm not sure. I heard a lady's voice at the end of that one. We'll move straight on to the next one, which just basically, there are some activist groups there and some individuals who just tell their own story, so I think it's only fair to let them go ahead and do that. So we'll just carry on with the second clip.
It's the 19th of February 2014, and today protesters from across the country will be gathering outside every Atos office to peacefully protest against the inhuman treatment of people receiving employment support allowance and its predecessors' incapacity benefits and disability allowance. The demonstrations are being spearheaded by disabled activists who had to suffer the consequence of these cuts. Cuts made by our government of millionaires. The shoddy treatment by Atos of some of our country's most vulnerable citizens has been well documented. December 2013 saw Tim Slater, a 50-year-old blind man suffering with agoraphobia, become the latest of a growing number of people to take their own lives after becoming victims of the government's changes to the benefit systems. This list includes at least 5 others. 39-year-old Lee Robinson of Crawley, Sussex was the first person whose suicide could be attributed to the government changes. 58-year-old Sean Pilkington apparently took his own life after receiving a letter informing him he was to lose his employment and support allowance, which he was awarded following a long-term illness. 47-year-old Edward Jakes of Nottingham took a fatal overdose after his payments were stopped. Jacqueline Harris, a 53-year-old former nurse from Bristol, was found dead at home from an apparent overdose after Atos declared her fit to work in November 2012. And alarmingly, in August 2011, 44-year-old former helicopter pilot Richard Sanderson fatally stabbed himself in the heart after his housing benefits were cut and he could no longer afford to house his family. Government figures released in July 2012 showed that 10,600 people died within 6 weeks of stopping claiming employment and support allowances. It is maintained that the majority of these 10,600 deaths related to people who had been passed as fit to work by Atos. Neither Atos or the Department of Works and Pensions are able to produce any figures to dispute these claims. Campaigners are calling for fairer treatment to all benefit claimants, especially the disabled and the chronically and terminally ill. Today we hope to hear some of their stories.
Yeah, so I'm Andy Green from Disabled People Against Cuts, and I also work for a local disabled people's organisation in Islington. I'm here today because we want to protest and have our voices heard. The demonisation of disabled people within the mainstream media has left for no spaces where disabled people can present their own narrative, can put their own personal stories, and can present a case where we are actually seen as people and not just scroungers, fraudsters and liars. Atos are responsible for carrying out work capability assessments on behalf of the government, on behalf of the DWP, and the manner in which they carry that out is dehumanising and degrading, and the result of that process has left many disabled people traumatised as well as isolated and impoverished. There is dual capability. Atos aren't alone. The DWP are also responsible. The government and their policy, the political class and their drive towards the movement of disabled people into the workplace where they become financially viable rather than those who receive financial support and public services. And there's something wrong with that on every level. Many disabled people want to work. There are many other barriers than disabled people themselves. Accessible infrastructure, employers' attitudes, the way workplaces are set up, the kind of in-work support that disabled people need to be able to work. And if all those things were addressed, then disabled people might have an opportunity to be on equal terms in going to look for work. And for those who can't work, who find themselves in a position where paid employment isn't an option, then we need to have a level of income available to people which allows them to benefit from and contribute to their communities and to live with dignity and independence. This country, despite its relative richness and opportunities compared to other countries, still is a very unequal society. It's still not an inclusive society, and there are disabling barriers in every single institution and structure that we've built in this country. and we need to do something serious about putting those right. And that isn't going to happen by one political party or one policy or one government department. It's going to happen by a change in society right across the board, where the general population puts its foot down and says no, that actually we want to build the kind of society that we aspire to, one where everybody has opportunity, one where there are no barriers for anybody, regardless of your background, your education, or your physical ability or any otherwise ability to do anything. And I think we're getting a sense right across this country, right across the world, that actually people are starting to recognise there's a crisis now. There's a crisis because the kind of society we thought we were building, working hard and contributing our tax and playing by the rules, we thought we were building a fair and equal society, and the truth is that actually that's not happening. The corporations and the political class have hoarded the wealth and opportunity for themselves, and are now doling that out like breadcrumbs and setting people upon each other. But people are starting to see through it, and we're starting to see a general unrest, and I think we're in the process of beginning some really hard questions about those who have governed and profited from us and over us for the last however long of decades. And we're starting to see people say no more. You know, we want answers, and I think that can only be a positive thing. And as disabled people, we want to be front and centre when that happens. We don't want anybody doing it for us. We never have done. We've never depended on anybody else to campaign on our behalf. We've always done it for ourselves. We've had huge victories over the years. The independent living movement, the disabled people's organisations, and the many different organisational on-the-ground community victories and policy victories that we've won. We're still a long way short, but we're going to continue.
Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio. Apologies, I think we got those two clips back to front. That one started off with Dave introducing the day, Dave Eden, and basically what we're going to do there that day. The next clip's a bit longer, it's about 29 minutes, but first we're going to go to a short piece of music, and I'll dedicate this one in advance to Natalie Bennett, and it's quite appropriate because it's by The Damned and it's called Liar, and she's a damned liar. Welcome back to Reality Bytes. I'm not having a good night here. That was obviously the Sex Pistols, they're not The Damned. I did have The Damned lined up. They have a song called Liar as well, but I obviously didn't send it to Paula there to play it. But there you go, never mind. The next bit's a bit longer. It's about 29 minutes. And it's we had a guy who runs an organisation who actually helps people deal with Atos and similar organisations, Adam Lowton, the Disabled People Against Cuts. We had Mark Thomas, who many people in the UK know as an activist and a comedian, Teresa Cole, who's an actress, TV star, I suppose you call them, and Reverend Paul Nicholson talking about. So we had quite a variety of people there yesterday. So we'll go to that clip now, and we'll be back with another short piece of music, and then followed by another short clip by Atos, and then Natalie Bennett making a complete fool of herself, followed by Christopher Booker. So we'll just go to the next Atos clip now.
Okay. Hi, my name's Adam Lowton. I'm a disability consultant. I'm a disabled person, and I'm talking here today because I've arranged the demonstration outside the Atos headquarters for what we've called the National Day of Action Against Atos. We've managed to get 80 demonstrations outside the offices of Atos. There are 144 in the country, but all the way across we managed to do 80. It's a phenomenal feat, and everybody's done blindingly well. And as I said, we're outside Atos headquarters here today, who have brought in security and riot police all over the place, and it seems ridiculous to what they're doing to what we're trying to do, which is just make our voice and points heard against the system and tell Atos we don't want them doing what they're doing to our community. They are killing people in our community. They are telling people who are not fit for work that they are fit for work. Just last week, the DWP released a figure themselves that Atos had made a mistake in 158,000 cases, and the DWP themselves overturned them. So that tells you that Atos made the mistakes. Atos say that they don't make the decision, but the DWP have overturned the mistakes of 158,000 cases that they've decided on. Who's lying to who here? Yeah? Look between the lines and think about what people are saying. And these are things that the cases, we're not even talking about the 42% of cases that get overturned on appeal in Tier 1. We're not talking about the cases that go to Tier 2, make precedent cases. We are talking about just the first assessment. People are going into assessments, they don't know what to face. There could be somebody there, as I had when I first went for an assessment, who was a chiropodist, going to talk to me about mental health, about sensory impairments, about autistic learning disabilities, about medical conditions that I need to use a mask to breathe at night every single day of my life. That's what I use. Somebody who's going to talk to me about the reason why I'm in a wheelchair and why I've got physical disabilities. You know, it's phenomenal that I've got somebody like that. It took me 3 years after they took my DLA away. They said I wasn't disabled enough for DLA. It took me 3 years of going to see all my specialists, consultants, etc., to get all the evidence together and present it back in a fresh claim for my DLA, and I got it given to me, awarded indefinitely, and I've got my awards back as to what they were before they took them away, and I'd been receiving for 6 years. So, and now I'm in a fight to reclaim my 3 years missing back of what I'd lost and all the debts that I ended up in because of it. But there you are. As I said, there are people out there like me who are fighting against the system, and the system is scared. Atos are very, very frightened. Atos don't know what to do, and it looks like the government are going to sack Atos. This is what we've been calling for. Looks like it's going to happen at the end of this month, and it's going to go out to tender. But it's going to go out to tender to the likes of G4S, the likes of Serco, and everybody else, who are going to be just the same as Atos. It's the system that needs changing, and we need to redo everything. Paul Litchfield, the doctor from BT, who's taken over from Professor Harrington as heading up these assessments. Harrington had 3 goes at fixing a system. I'd have fixed it first time if it was wrong. He had 3 goes, and now somebody else is putting their fingers in and trying to do it as well. And that can't be right. The whole thing needs to start from the beginning and be redone. The DWP are at fault, and Ian Duncan Smith, I don't know what you're playing at. You know, there are people out for your blood. You know, people would love to see your head on a pole. And for David Cameron, my God, you should know better. I'm terribly, I felt really bad when your son died. But what are you doing to all these people that have, you're killing people? Why are you, acting as a disability denier to a community that is 20 million strong, with all their families and the people who are dependent on their work? Yeah? You've lost votes. You've lost the confidence of people. Yeah, I don't know what I would say to you if I ever met you face to face, but I'm sure it'd be explosive. I don't know, is that enough?
Okay. George, we'll just talk. Mark, thanks very much for giving us some time and talking to Community Press Group today.
That's fine.
We're down here outside Atos' offices in central London. Why are you down here today?
Well, to show solidarity that this is absolutely intolerable. That Atos are they're on the verge of losing their contract because their administration of it is just so awful, which is important. But actually, what you've got here, this is I say time and time again, this is an ideological assault upon people with disabilities, and the ideology is an attack against the welfare state. It's a right-wing attack. It's an attack against sort of like the state care of people with disabilities, and actually it's demonising people with disabilities. Absolutely. So we don't actually. It's not just about about Atos. You know, they're the kind of public face of this.
Exactly, you know, this is much bigger picture.
Yeah, we've got to actually get the coalition. We've got to stop these attacks, and we've got to stop this budgetary requirement to drive policy, which is what they're doing.
Okay, so you're a smart man. We know you're being a smart man. What are the solutions?
My solution, I think basically what we need to do is actually the first thing is, as I said, you need to get rid of the budgetary requirement, right? Okay. Quite obviously, Ian Duncan Smith and the coalition, their objective is to cut money. That's their objective. That's why they've brought in the assessment, right? The whole point here is if you want to actually have any form of fair assessment, take away the targets of cutting money, and then you can actually talk about catering for people's needs.
Absolutely. It seems to me that we're living in the 19th century all of a sudden.
I think it's worse than that. I think it's worse than that because, you've got a number of attacks upon people with disabilities have increased. The number of hate crime that's gone up against people with disabilities has increased. This is the wrong century for this kind of behaviour.
No, absolutely. And are you here representing anyone today?
Myself.
You're here just representing yourself and a bit of solidarity?
Yeah, absolutely, solidarity. And we're working as well with the Whale Petition guys, and what we've done is we've created an assessment of Atos. It's an academic survey which people who've been through the Atos system can fill in, and it asks simple questions like, whether when you turn up for an assessment, was there disabled access? Did it have disabled parking? If you had to change and use public transport, did you need a helper? All these sort of simple things about whether Atos is doing, any kind of actual real work here to look after people with disabilities and to actually take into account that they're working with people with disabilities. So our assessment is online. You can get it on the Whale Petition or on my website, markthomasinfo.co.uk.
Brilliant.
And our deadline is the 10th of March. We're going to get over 2,000 people filling it in. Then we've got academics who are going to go through the findings and present it to the Select Committee in Parliament.
Fantastic. Mark, thanks very much for your time. It's been brilliant meeting you.
Real pleasure.
You're a gentleman. Thank you.
That's a pleasure.
Hello, my name's Teresa Cole. I'm coming here today to demo because I believe that the government have got it wrong about the policies to do with the bedroom tax and also assessing people to get back to work through the company Atos. Atos is the company who have been employed by the government, who are actually assessing disabled people and telling them they're fit enough to get back to work. You might think, well, so what? Well, they have made a lot of errors. I'm here actually, I've been asked by my good friend who lives up in Berwick-upon-Tweed, so she wasn't able to get down here. She runs a Facebook page called Atos Miracles, and she's asked me to speak today. I know Jessica and Adam, the organisers, because I came down in summer to outside Parliament to also protest about the bedroom tax, which I think is a regressional bedroom tax. I think we're going back in times and it's the worst sort of taxation since the poll tax, really, isn't it? It's not progressional. Progressional to me would be taxing global corporation companies more. It is taxing the very wealthy more. If you want to gain more for the Treasury, then gain more taxes by taxing the very wealthy properly. But instead, the present government have targeted the very weak and vulnerable. I suppose there's been a lot of media hype about the benefit system. There is there's always going to be abuse of every system. There has been some abuse. There's probably been some abuse of tax evasion. We all know that the offshore accounts hide a lot of money. So there's abuse for people not paying their taxes, people who are paid cash in hand. So there's a lot of lack of integrity around. But the welfare system is by and large one that has been set up full of integrity for people who really, really need it. And it's for the disabled, sick and dying, and those people who are genuinely, they've lost their jobs and do need to finance their living expenses. They do need to have some support. I would rather that than go back to the Victorian times where the very hard up, the very poor and homeless people were dying very young and starving, and I don't want to see starvation in my country. I don't want to see poverty in this country. We live in a third world country at the moment, if that's what's happening. We are actually a first world, rich, civilized society. So some of the reasons is because I've had a very good friend for 20 years who's partially disabled. I've known her through the very worst of her illness. I also have had my sister's son was in Great Ormond Street for a year and a half in 2007, and both my parents and I helped my sister with her two older sons, so I became a bit of a carer. We were all financially impacted by that situation, and I do know someone who has an very severely autistic boy who has had to be schooled, down in the New Forest, and without some form of help from the system, he would not have survived. Also, I've had some injuries myself, car crash injuries. I couldn't claim it at the time. I have been self-employed, and I found the impact of having car crash injuries pretty hard to deal with financially. So I am representing the majority of society who say to the government, who 78% of which the MPs are millionaires, don't really know how the other half lives, nor Middle England really. So I'm here to speak today on behalf of Atos Miracles. This speech has been written by my very good friend and Atos Miracles. There's a Facebook page called Atos Miracles, and the page actually is run by the sick, disabled people, for sick, disabled and dying people. And as the name Atos Miracles suggests, we are rather in awe of the cures made by the incurable by Atos. We have a membership of about 14,000 people, and we reach up to 750,000 people on a busy week. So it's a really valuable networking page for the very disabled. We are at the coalface picking up the mess left behind when Atos and the DWP get their jobs wrong, which they frequently do. We are contacted daily by hundreds of disabled people, some without any monies to live on, no food in the house, no heating, and understandably many come to us suicidal as a direct result of their interaction with Atos and the DWP. Now, time and time again, people tell us their Atos reports bears no resemblance to what actually happens in the assessment. We've seen people declared fit for work because they were able to take their coats off. Fit for work because they didn't cry at the interview. Fit for work because they went by bus. Fit for work because they took a carrier bag into the room. I mean, is this not laughable? Are we exaggerating? No. A senior Atos trainer was filmed and broadcast by Channel 4 dispatches saying, as long as you've got one finger and you can press a button, you don't score anything. Atos Defence, they are only doing their job. They claim they are only implementing policies put in place by the DWP and the government. People claim we are exaggerating when we liken their response to the Nuremberg defence. But the truth is that people are dying. 1,000 people have died within 6 weeks after being pronounced fit for work, in 1 year alone. So some died by suicide, others were frail and their deaths were prematurely hastened along. Some people were dying, and the result was that they died as a result of the process, the stress. So what was the government's response to this? Well, its own shocking figures. Well, it refuses to release the latest figures on how many people have actually died after their assessment. But Atos are only doing their job. The Nuremberg defence. Now, Atos tell us they are a decent company providing a public service. So what is the benefit to the public? Well, it costs the taxpayer a 500 million contract is what it's costs the taxpayers. 500 million. Plus their 1 million bonus. Atos did not pay any corporation tax. They are not penalised when they get their assessments wrong. The state and not Atos pick up the bills for all the tribunals which overturn their evidence. 600,000 appeals have been lodged against Atos, costing the taxpayers £60 million per year. The National Health Service picks up the bill for worsening of people's health when the WCA goes wrong. One psychiatrist told us around 95% of their patients have been made worse by the process. The demand on social services goes up as people need food vouchers, help and support. Citizens Advice Bureau are working flat out trying to help people through the appeals and debts which naturally follow. Their service has already stretched beyond breaking point. Carers who receive the sum of £59.75 a week to live on for caring full time for loved ones lose that and find themselves unemployed when the process goes wrong. Atos Miracles will never stop saying people die as a result of Atos, the government and the WCA. So unless you are super rich, you have no protection from the system. You may have been fit and healthy once, but when things happen like illness or disease can strike without warning. So you're decent, you're hard working, so you think, not to worry, I've paid my national insurance for years, the government will look after me, I'm not like all those scroungers you hear about in the media, my problem is real. Then you find out that you're wrong. You cannot work, you apply for employment and support allowance because you have no money to live on. You attend an Atos assessment. They lie, they twist your words, omit facts and terrorise you. You may be even unable to care for yourself, unable to get up, wash, dress or cook a meal. Yet because Atos lies, you are pronounced you are fit for work. So when they pronounce you are fit for work, that's it, isn't it? This means that when you have this, you're in a catch-22 situation of being told to claim job seekers allowance. But you cannot claim job seekers allowance because your disability prevents you from working. It means you are claiming absolutely nothing. Alternatively, they may put you in the work-related activity group of ESA, which means they can force you to undertake unpaid work under the guise of workfare. If you cannot physically or mentally do this when your pittance is sanctioned and all money taken off you, well, we've known housebound people who this has happened to. This is what is killing people. If you cannot work, you cannot live on fresh air. People are going hungry. People are losing their homes because they are unable to pay their rents. People are unable to heat their homes and freeze. People are unable to care for themselves and have to succumb to their illnesses. People have committed suicide to escape their fate of a slow, agonising, lingering death from starvation or the cold, or just simply because they are so worried about finances. Atos is a company that is a tool this government is using against the most vulnerable people in this society. And Atos is a company prepared to follow orders that it knows directly leads to deaths or suicides. Atos is a company avoiding tax. Atos is a company causing fear, hunger and homelessness. Atos is a company draining the NHS, draining the charities, draining the tribunal services. So Atos, you've got blood on your hands. And from Atos Miracles and on behalf of my friend again, I say solidarity and peace and love to you all. From Atos Miracles, everybody's life is precious.
Thanks for speaking to us this afternoon. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us why you're here.
Yeah, I'm obviously the Reverend Paul Nicholson. Was very much involved in the poll tax demonstrations back in the 1990s, and I refused to pay my poll tax in those days. But in so doing, I discovered that there were people who couldn't pay their poll tax, couldn't pay their rent, couldn't pay their utility bills, and so founded with some friends, founded a charity to work with people who couldn't pay them, and that was the Secures 2000 Trust. It's now developed with really brilliant CEO and staff, and doing well over 1,500 cases a year.
Wow, congratulations.
Of only the most vulnerable people really on benefits. We don't normally deal with credit cards or with mortgage debts. We do deal with rent, council tax overpayments and the like.
Yes.
And that was the KS2000 Trust, and they're wonderful. But I felt I needed a bit free of the limitations on charities in the political arena, because what's happening now, obviously to the disabled, but it's not just the disabled, is really very painful indeed for them and painful to watch. So I have had a go at founding Taxpayers Against Poverty. And we have a Facebook page, Taxpayers Against Poverty, where we now have over 5,400 likes.
Well done.
And rising,
brilliant,
as I said. And so I read carefully everything that's going on in the field of poverty and welfare reform. And I happen to think that the Archbishop of Westminster was entirely right when he said the bottom's fallen out of the welfare system. It is no longer a safety net. But David Cameron in the Telegraph this morning says why the Archbishop is wrong about welfare.
We're just interviewing. Okay. It's all right, carry on, don't worry. We're live, that's cool, don't worry.
It's all right. So I read that article with great interest because he justifies telling the Archbishop he's not telling the truth, which is quite a powerful statement against an Archbishop, by saying that if you're over 25, if you're over 25 and looking for work, you receive £71.70 a week job seekers allowance, £6.25 a week more than at the last election. Well, I mean, £6.25 is not £6.25 because prices have gone up since the last election for a start.
Absolutely, particularly the ones that hit the most.
Well,
energy,
indeed,
fuel,
energy, food, fuel, clothes. And so, and it's exactly what the £71.70 is to pay for. £71.70 is after housing costs, after council tax, before 2013. So, and even then, we've been telling the Labour Party for, I suppose, 20 years, or certainly the 16 years they were in power, that it was half the government's poverty threshold at 60% of the median income, which is the way they measure it, after housing costs, and it was 42% of the Joseph Flatley Foundation minimum income standard after housing costs. And you're right, it is an income which is meant to pay for food, clothes, fuel, transport, and all other necessities. It's meant to be a minimum income. Well, it obviously never worked anyway. It was very, very tough to live on, particularly we started getting debts. But along comes welfare reform, and from April 2013 we had the bedroom tax and the council tax. And so I've met decent people who have been employed all their lives, paying tax, all their taxes, and suddenly they fall ill or they're made redundant. And they find themselves on £71.70 a week, single adult, living in a small flat with one single bedroom. And now they're expected to pay £24 a week out of that £70 rent and £5 a week council tax. Now, if you take £5 and £24 out of £71.70, you're not left with enough to pay for food, fuel, clothes, and transport.
Precisely.
And so, I reckon that means that the benefit system has collapsed. It no longer provides a safety net, and that the Archbishop of Westminster is entirely right.
Okay, so have you got any suggested solutions on what should change and what should happen?
Well, apart from the fact that the present government really needs to go, there are two things I'd like to see happen. One is that we have affordable housing, because even under the Joseph Flatley Foundation minimum income food standard, minimum income standard, which includes rent and includes council tax, it was never right. I commissioned research back in the 1998 into minimum income standards, and I was always worried about it because the rent goes up and up and up, and it takes away the money needed for food, clothes, fuel and transport.
Absolutely.
And that's what's happening. We have a chaotic housing market. So the two things I think would have to come in would be steps to make housing affordable and to take the speculative part of it out. So you can't let any foreign wealthy person fleeing their own dodgy economy buy property in London, and lots of it, and leave it empty, which only forces up prices and rents for all the people who are Londoners.
Yes, absolutely.
So that has to stop. And not only that, but bankers use their bonuses. They just give cash for property and watch the price go up and then sell it and make even more money. It's an outrageous system of speculation in land, which should be for homes, which is what buildings should be for, not for speculation. So I would introduce, and there's a lot of people working on this, so I'm not on my own on this one, what's something called a land value tax. So even if you speculate, there is a tax on that bit of money you make, which you make for doing no work whatever, because the price of land's gone up. It would also make people use the land, because if you use the land, if you make a tax on the land, you need to get that tax back, and it would be better to use it for housing or for jobs. And there are states, there are cities in the United States who are actually using land value tax, and I think the sooner we get that in, the better. The other thing is I'd have all minimum incomes standards related to prices. They've taken away the connection with prices. It was never really there, even with the Labour government. But you can do research into what is a reasonable amount of money to have for food, what is reasonable for transport, what is reasonable.
Those numbers are there already. Everybody, there's enough research out there that gives those numbers.
It's all there.
Yes.
So,
but this is about ideology, really, and about
it's entirely about ideology. It's entirely about believing that people won't work unless they're starved.
When the reality is that most people claiming benefits are attempting to do some form of work as well.
It's into the human genes to work. You don't need to be told by David Cameron you've got to find work. By Duncan Smith.
But he's only shouting to the party faithful, though, isn't he? To rabble-rouse within the party.
Well, there are the free marketeers, and they're very extreme free marketeers, who believe there should be no benefits at all, and everything will be all right. They live in a sort of world where there's a heaven in the future, where there are no benefits, no taxes, and all the wealthy get wealthy and all the poor get poorer. It's a very silly and very unfortunate ideology. You're quite right.
Absolutely. Okay, well, Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Nice talking to you too.
Thanks ever so much for talking to Community Press Group, and I'm sure we'll meet again. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio. We've got one short segment to go on the Atos interviews, the last couple of interviews there. But before that, apologies. The last song called Liar was by the Sex Pistols, but we've managed to get the right one this time. And again, this is for Natalie Bennett. Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio. And you'll listen to part 3 of our interviews from Atos yesterday. We're going to go into the final segment. It's only about 13 minutes or so. And that features a mainstream journalist, Sonia Poulton, who left the People's Voice, Mr. Ike's supposedly, unrestricted channel for people's views. But she was told she could say this and she could say that, and she's going to possibly come up to the office to tell us all exactly what that was about. But yeah, Sonia Poulton, TV presenter, radio host. We have a young lady, Simone, who's 27 years as a carer. So we'll take it away without much further ado, and we'll be back right after with the Natalie Ben interview.
Hello, my name is Sonia Poulton. I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and I am here today outside Atos in Triton Square, London NW1, to support sick and disabled people in the UK, and by extension all sick, disabled and vulnerable people globally. We need to come together and unite against various global agendas that are taking place towards the most vulnerable in society. In terms of what is taking place here, the people have amassed because Atos, which is essentially an IT company, has been given millions and millions and millions of pounds by the British coalition and the government before them to carry out assessments on very, very vulnerable people. Most of these people are not fit to work, but they are put through a stringent assessment which doesn't allow for invisible illnesses or people with mental health issues. The descriptors of the WCA are entirely inappropriate, as indeed is the WCA itself. It isn't just Atos that I oppose, it is the work capability assessment. If sick and disabled people are to be assessed, then they must be assessed by their own doctors. I am grateful that the British Medical Association backed this, backed that the WCA was inappropriate for vulnerable people, as do I as a journalist. I wish more of the media would be here today. Of course they won't be, because they are complicit in the abuse, vilification and demonisation of sick and disabled people. The statistics released by the Department for Work and Pensions are always inaccurate. We know that. Ian Duncan-Smith has been called to account for this. He does a neat sidestep, which he's always done, but the truth still remains, and that is we are bullying people to their deaths for jobs that don't exist and in situations that are inhumane and heinous, and that is why I'm here today. I will continue to support sick, disabled and vulnerable people, and I ask that you do too.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're just talking to Simone, who's come down to demonstrate outside of Atos this afternoon. Simone, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Okay, I'm a carer. I've been a carer for 26 years, and this is my daughter, who's 26 years of age. She's got Turner syndrome. I've come up here to support the many disabled with the Atos protest, but I'm also here for many other reasons, really, mainly because I don't agree with what government's doing. Currently at the moment in England, most carers are allowed a carers assessment. I haven't had a carers assessment since 2008, which means I don't get a day off. I'm always with my daughter, and one of the reasons for this is because I've been told she doesn't come under the criteria anymore because she's got a milder disability. But just because she has a milder disability doesn't mean that she doesn't need any help. This has meant I can't go to work. She can't move on with her life. Mr Cameron states that he wants disabled to go into employment, but actually there is no support out there. I've been trying to get help for my daughter for at least 10 years. I've been to the Labour government and my local Labour MP. I've written lots of letters to MPs, and the only thing that they gave me was a standardised letter to state how much money they were spending on disability. No actual help for me. I also wrote to Miliband, and he sent me the same standard letter stating how much money they were putting in for disability. Since then I went to my local MP, that was about 2 years ago. I was supposed to have a half-an-hour appointment with him. I walked out within about 10 minutes and I told him that I would never vote for him, and he pretty much disgusted me because, first of all, I've had to give up work in order to look after my daughter, so I am only on carers allowance and I do a 7-day-a-week job. There's nobody else to take over from me, really. What else can I say to you? I feel the education system is definitely letting the young people down. My daughter found that they weren't helping her to progress, and now she's stuck. She's got no exams. School left her with basically nothing. The curriculums, they're disgusting, really. There isn't enough help out there for young people, and young people out there aren't stupid. I've met a lot of people with learning disabilities, and they are capable, but we just don't support them enough. to give them the help they need. Now, she's 26, she shouldn't be stuck at home with mum, she shouldn't be going out on her own. The social care system's not very good. She was taught to go to one place, which was Chatham, which was a local town, and I think she went to the cinema once and sat in screen 6 on her own, and eventually I decided that it was too dangerous for her and she came home. She hasn't been out since then. She doesn't go out on her own, which means I take her out socially. I bring her up here if it's necessary. Now, the other problem that's happened is since Mr Cameron's changed the rules for the NHS, she is not under a specialist. She was supposed to have long-term help to sort out the fact that she's got a new disability now, which is Turner syndrome, which wasn't discovered till she was 21. But what's happened is that the doctor can refer me locally, but local doctors don't know a lot about her condition, and she needs to come up here to London. But that hasn't happened, so therefore at the moment our situation is I'm a carer. I don't get a carer any kind of help. I can't move her life on. She can't go to work. She can't go back to English and Maths because that wasn't working for her. She started getting panic attacks and I sort of gave up, and all I do now is start trying to fight the system, not just for her but for the many others. It's just totally unfair, and really Tory government don't know, they have got no idea of what they're doing, and they shouldn't even be in charge of the policies. I can't vote Labour and I can't vote Tories. I can't vote for anyone because nobody has given me any help, and I've absolutely lost everything. My marriage broke down because of lack of help. I've lost all my friends. I don't see a friend. I don't do nothing. I can't. Now, when I retire, I haven't got the savings because I had to give up work. And yet, I go to my local MP who tells me now, years ago, she was entitled to a flat. Yeah, so I thought, great, I can give up work. At least she will get a flat. And now I'm told she can have one room in shared accommodation for the rest of her life. That's after I've given up my life. I get nothing in return. And a lot of carers, you know, that carer's allowance isn't enough to do anything. I can't even go on holiday. And if I do have a holiday, I've got to pay for it because nobody's ever given me one.
So this
the whole system,
benefit welfare system that we've got there,
it needs to change.
Designed to look after people, particularly people like you, has done nothing for you at all.
I'm not on benefits, yeah, she is. So I get my carer's allowance and that is it. You know, they say about some carers do work, but what am I supposed to do with her? Leave her at home all day doing nothing? And she went down the job centre. She couldn't understand what they were saying. They didn't speak at her level either. And, you know, she hasn't got the exams to get into anything. And, you know, the support complete from top to bottom. In fact, from when she was a child till now, when I thought the whole system was going to change, I was pleased. I thought, oh, wonderful, they're going to change the system and they're going to give us more help. But the only time I hear about getting any help is once a year when we get Carers Week, and you will get a picture in the newspapers of politicians saying how wonderful carers are. Well, it's about time they showed us how wonderful we are and give us the help we need. And now with the NHS, they've got these local commissioning groups, you know, but they don't take consideration that she is vulnerable. She doesn't want to go out at night by herself. She's frightened. She gets panics on escalators, things like that. And so, you know, for her to come up to London on her own, find her way round, it is too daunting. So it's not just a matter of teaching her to travel. If the train changes halfway and things like that, there's so many things. And the other thing is when she goes to a doctor, while she can understand what he's saying, she can't understand the technical side of it. So although she's got a mild disability, she still needs some support. Now, it's okay while I'm still living, but what happens when I go, there is nobody for her. If she's supposed to have an operation and doesn't understand what that operation is about, she needs the support, even though she's got a mild disability. And you know, the welfare system, I didn't used to know a lot about the welfare system, but we tend to go to the pub quite a lot because, yes we do, Mr Cameron, we spend money at the pub, 1 Coke and a lemonade. But by going to the pub we meet a lot of ordinary people, and people out there who think that the welfare system, everybody's scrounging. You know, they should go to the pub and talk to everybody, because I speak to people that are unemployed, people who are sick, young people, youth who are all qualified, who've got so many exams, and the only job they can get is either in McDonald's or in a shop. You know, years ago they used to be round our way. They used to be the dockyards, factories. They've all closed. Everything's closed. And one job, I think one local job, there was about 3,000 people went for a few jobs. I mean, it's ridiculous. They've got no chance. And my daughter, who studied and had to borrow money and get a loan, you know, and what for, she still couldn't get a job that she actually worked for, you know, studied for. And now they're selling off their loans as well to the privately. I mean, how ridiculous. I mean, she is in a situation now, because I didn't work, I haven't been able to help my children as much as maybe had I worked all my life, you know. So, you know, they're both stuck renting. They can't, the rents are too high. It's actually absolutely everything needs to be thought of, to think of the people, the lower end of the scale, rather than the people who are earning lots of money, you know.
Simone, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Reality Bytes, and that was the last of our Atos interviews there. I think it's about 10 in all, except for the one which really I deliberately wanted to get, and that was Natalie Bennett, because I wanted her to walk on camera, which she kindly obliged me with. And basically, I had a lot of criticism about this, because we were accused of hijacking the Atos event to get Natalie Bennett, but there was a lot of trolls on the Facebook page, and who cares about them, really? But the fact is, we went down to the Atos demo, 10 interviews, and she hung about for about an hour waiting to get on camera because bit of a media whore, I guess. And this is what transpired, really, and she deserved everything she got, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm Neil Foster from the Community Press Group. We have with us Green Party leader Natalie Bennett. Yep. Of course, I know your name. I have a couple of points I want to put to you. In terms of what's happening here today, in terms of Atos, if you just give a brief outline of why you're here today.
Right, yep, sure. Well, I'm here today to show the Green Party support for this and the 80 other protests all around the country. You know, it's very clear that we need to highlight the impact of Atos and all the other privatised groups who are implementing what are actually dreadful government policies and making huge profits from it. So it's right to focus on Atos. We also need to focus on the government policies behind the profits they're making.
Okay. Would you say that Atos should go completely?
Well, I would say that Atos should go, but that's only a partial solution to the problem. What needs to happen is we need to abolish the work capability assessment. We need to replace that with simply an assessment by the medical practitioners who are treating the individual concerned, who are by far the people best placed to judge whether they are fit for work or not.
Okay.
And more broadly, what we need to do is stop privatising government services and government decision-making and bring those decisions back in-house.
Right, okay. Now, the Green Party Vision for Britain, I have a copy here, and it says here you're committed to providing well-being and prosperity for everybody in harmony with nature. Now, the World Health Organisation defines well-being as the perception of somebody's happiness.
Yep. I talk a lot about a decent life.
Well, I mean, my point is you're providing people's perceptions.
Yeah, well, people need to feel like they're respected, like they're regarded as a valuable member of the community, and that means that people need to. I was talking in the speech about it's not just enough to ensure that people don't starve and have some kind of roof over their head. People need to be able to be involved in the community, go down to the cafe, be able to afford to buy a cup of tea with their friends. Need to be able in a situation where they can feel like they're part of society, they're engaged in society, they're doing useful things, whether those things are paid or not.
Right, but why should the Green Party's job be to provide some of this perception?
Well, I think what we have to do is people need to feel like, how people feel, how like they feel like...
I hate to cut you off, but I mean, people don't need to be told how to feel. People know how they feel themselves. They don't need some minister or politician or private company telling them what the perception of society should be.
But people need to actually feel like they're in a society where they are. How people perceive them is important, because
perception is important, isn't it?
Exactly, that's right.
That's not fact.
Yeah, well, no, but also that people need to perceive that they're regarded and going to have to be treated fairly. If they become ill, and that's one of the things that's worth focusing on, is that any of us could become ill at any time and could need that safety net, which is being torn away.
Police officers here standing there, there could be an accident tomorrow and end up standing here protesting against Atos.
Exactly.
But they don't realise that. A green society will enable everyone to do valuable work. Everyone. Does that include disabled?
Yep, and what we include in work is that it's interesting to look at the definition of work. Is traditionally our society tends to think of work as paid work, but sitting with your neighbour.
Volunteerism.
Yeah, well, it's people should be allowed to regard it being a useful thing, whether it's helping in the local community garden, having a cup of tea with a neighbour.
My point is, what if they're not capable of work? You've said everyone.
Well, I think everyone is capable of the broad definition of work I'm just talking about, which is not paid work, but to make a contribution to society. Everyone is capable of making some kind of contribution to society.
Some people aren't.
Well, I mean, if you're in a situation where at an extreme, if you're a person in a coma.
Who Atos have sent letters to.
Indeed, exactly. So then you're in a situation where your contribution is that you're providing a focus around which people can provide help and support. You're making a contribution to society by being in society, and we need to acknowledge that contribution of everybody in society.
Sticking with Atos, I read through the Green Party's manifesto as it is, and you say here the Green Party will be investing in warm and efficient homes, energy storage and smart grids. So you're talking about the global smart grid, I assume, or just British smart? Global smart grid or UK smart grid?
Smart goods, sorry?
Smart grids.
Oh, smart grids, sorry, I didn't misheard you. What we need to do is actually use our energy well. We're talking now about energy policy, and what we support is, say, the energy bill revolution, which is the idea that we take money from carbon taxes, insulate and provide all of those kind of facilities we're talking about for every home that needs it. And that's put forward. That's a proposal that's put forward by the unions, charities like Help the Aged, Child Poverty Action Network, and the unions are coming together and saying that we should be making everyone's home warm, comfortable, and affordable to heat. Right. And that's what we need to do.
So the implementation of smart meters would be part of that.
Yeah.
Right. Are you aware that Atos World Grid are the biggest suppliers of smart meter systems in the world?
No, I wasn't aware of that. But
well, you've not done your research, because they are.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
Would you object to that?
We would make companies like Atos. We want to make sure that they pay their taxes, pay their workers properly.
That wasn't the question. The question was, would you protest Atos on this subject but not others?
Well, I protest against Atos anywhere where they're taking government money for contracts, taking large profits.
I'm sure they're going to get paid a lot of money to install smart meters across this country.
Well, I mean,
which themselves are carcinogenic.
I think that's an issue that's open to debate.
Well, there's a lot of research being done on it, and I can assure you that is the case. And apart from the spying technology incorporated in them as well, this company is involved in that. Atos are also involved with Siemens, IBM, Microsoft, HP, and Siemens and IBM in particular. We'll take Siemens. Are you, I suppose, supportive in terms of transport, the HS2?
No, we're opposed to HS2.
Okay, that's good, because Siemens are actually advocating using the disabled to build it.
Yes, no, and I spoke out, I certainly tweeted against that.
They're a sister company of Atos.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, along with IBM. Mm-hmm. Now, Siemens operated slave concentration camps, and that's Germany. Mm-hmm. IBM provided all the list of names for Hitler to invade. Before he invaded every country he went into, IBM supplied all the information and gave it to Hitler, and that's how he was able to round up whoever he wanted to round up, whether it was Jews, Catholics, Gypsies, whatever. Now, we now have the care.data.
Yep, and
which has now been delayed.
Yes, the delay is a good thing, but we're opposed to that in terms of the risk of being used by pharmaceutical.
I have interviewed doctors on this, and I have been told that many doctors are opting out everybody, and they're expecting a knock at the door from the inspection teams.
Yeah, well, right. there is actually Pulse magazine covered, the GP's magazine covered. There's one doctor who said he was going to opt all his patients out, and they're threatening with breach of contract.
Yeah. Well, IBM, of course, involved in handing over all these records. Very similar records to what Care.Data system is looking at now. And Atos are to be given all the information. Did you know that?
I knew it was going to go to a wide range of companies.
Well, it's been publicised on some of the clinics' websites that it's going to Atos.
All right.
Now, they're going to take a contract off them for this, and then they're going to hand over all the health records to Atos. So they're going to do what with them?
Yeah, no, well, one of the big concerns is in terms of the use of it. Well, privacy has been the big focus of concern, but there's also the concern about if this goes to pharmaceutical research and what kind of profits will be made out of that pharmaceutical research.
Well, it's going to go to insurance companies, it's going to go to anybody asks, even private employers, I would suggest. Is this guy likely to be off ill? Before Atos.
I think there's grave concerns about that, and we're opposed to this
it's
happening.
It's obviously going to happen. Right, getting on to what you said on the BBC yesterday.
Remind me what I said.
Well, I mean, the Green Party is all for, I'll get on to this, free speech. Mm-hmm. I'm on the wrong page there. There you go. Okay, treating all people with dignity and without discrimination. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't believe any of this nonsense about CO2 whatsoever. I never have done. Mm-hmm. I just think it's a total fallacy.
Is your freedom in a free society.
Right, it is. So why are you advocating that government employees are sacked if they don't believe in your agenda?
Well, no,
what an MP?
What I said was this is a Green Party position that senior government advisors and ministers should be prepared to accept action on climate change because that's what the best evidence is. And
best evidence. There is no evidence. There is no evidence. There's a consensus. A consensus is not evidence.
I don't think this is very useful.
Well, of course it is. Of course, I'm asking you a relevant question.
Yeah, we have the IPCC report, the most scrutinised science in history. The most scrutinised science in history. We have 97% of climate scientists agree, and this is the current situation. We're based on science. I don't think there's any use in debating this. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you.
Debate is over, as the Green Party is very good at saying.
Well, the scientific debate is over. The policy debate continues.
No, there is no evidence.
Thank you very much.
There is no evidence.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Bye.
And chemtrails. You should look at geoengineering. That was Natalie Bennett of the Green Party, who has just run off because she can't get involved in a debate on CO2, which she is a firm cult member of that Green Society, who believes that human beings are a plague on the earth. Enough said.
Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio, and there you heard Natalie Bennett, the what they call them, leaders of these cult parties, namely the Green Party, who can't answer basic questions. She has no knowledge of Atos whatsoever, apart from the bandwagon she's decided to jump on to promote herself and a party, of which she isn't even an MP. She's dictating to government, regardless of what you think of that government. I mean, they're all about a bunch of shysters, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, doesn't matter. But she's got the gall to think that she can dictate policy to people when she's not even been elected to any public position. I don't know who she thinks she is, but, well, what can I say, really? He was crap at interviewing. Who was that? Peace in Your Garden. I've never heard of you before. don't really know why you're here, to be honest. But there you go. Possibly a troll, possibly not. Who knows? Who cares? It's called Free Speech, Peace in Your Garden. Next, we're going to go on to Chris Booker interview, but before that, we'll have another little piece of music dedicated to Natalie Bennett. Come back to Reality Bytes and Peace in Your Garden. If you think I'm a funny guy, you email me, and I suggest you troll off somewhere else and bother someone else that gives a toss, because I don't. Basically, you're one of these guys who sits on the computer and makes comments at people who get off their arses and actually do things. I'm sure you do nothing except sit beside your computer screen and mouth off for no reason whatsoever, except that you get some kind of thrill out of it. Good luck to you. Good luck to you. I hope you support your side, because you'll be part of that. Anyway, moving on. We've just been Christopher Booker, I think, in the last 35 minutes, so we better get on with that. And this is about the floods in Somerset, so take it away, Paula. And I suppose if not got time to get on at the end of this, then we'll be back next week. And Alan Taylor Shearer comes on at 10 o'clock. Cheers. Okay, welcome to Reality Bytes Radio. We have a guest on today, Christopher Booker, who is going to explain basically the situation regarding the floods in Somerset and other parts of the country, of course. And his colleague, Dr. Richard North, has also been working on this, and their links to the environmental agencies, links to the European Union water directives, etc. So, Christopher, you know far more about this subject than I do, so I'll just let you take it away from here.
Yeah, well, Neil, it's been a very long haul, this investigation. Because I live in Somerset, quite near where the levels are covered in 65 square miles of water at the moment, I was aware around Christmas time that something rather disturbing was going on, and so I hunted around to find some real local experts, technical experts, engineers and farmers who understood why this disaster was happening for the third time in a year. Third time in 3 years. It's happened 2012, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14. So we've had every kind of explanation of how it's all to do with global warming and so on. But the fact is, as we have recently learnt, this is by no means the wettest winter that the country's had in the last 250 years, although it was a very, very wet January. Anyway, so the first stage was to establish that what lay at the root of the problem was that the Environment Agency, which took over control of all Britain's rivers in 1996, had not been dredging the key rivers that run across the Somerset levels, which are vital to taking water away from the levels out to the sea. And for 20 years, or nearly 20 years now, 17 years, they haven't been dredging, increasingly not dredging, and therefore this was the first step in trying to understand why things are so much worse. Than, we're looking at an area of land which was basically reclaimed from being a marshy swamp and partly the sea, way back in the Middle Ages, and then very much again in the 17th century when Dutch engineers were moved in. So you've got a huge area. It's a fifth of all the farmland in Somerset, with, of course, thousands of people living on it and lots of villages. So the first step was to uncover the fact that the Environment Agency was obviously right in the frame for not dredging. Secondly, there was a big question mark over in the old days, what happened was that the rivers were dredged so that the water could escape, but also you had an absolute mass of, we've got 1,000 miles of ditches, which are called reams locally, some of them very big, which are part of a very elaborate, sophisticated system for keeping the levels more or less as dry land, although it was accepted that it would flood every winter, possibly for 2 or 3 weeks, but nothing like what we're seeing at the moment. Then we started to get into what the politicians have been doing, particularly, it turned out, the European Union, which has got a very systematic policy expressed in various directives, like culminating in the Floods Directive of 2007, which does allow, in the name of creating habitat for wildlife and what they call biodiversity, it does allow for more flooding, an increase in flooding on what they call floodplains, although actually the levels aren't a floodplain, they're a wetland, which has been made largely dry land thanks to activities of man over the last several centuries. What we're now uncovering, the latest twist in this horrible and murky tale, is that since 2005, the Labour government, in accord with European legislation, was actively promoting an increased level of flooding right across the Somerset levels. We're only now coming across the documents which show this. There was a man called Elliot Morley who later went to jail, you may remember, who was the floods minister at the time. And he issued a statement in 2005 that the government was going to pour quite a lot of money, several £million a year, into creating a more flooded Somerset levels in the interests again of birds and wildlife, at the expense, it has to be said, of the people who live there and the farmers. Who it's a very productive piece of farmland. I say piece of. I mean, it's a huge area of farmland, which gives a livelihood to thousands of people. So altogether, we've been putting together this mosaic, which, and the one person I haven't mentioned so far is very important in this story, is a woman called the Baroness Young of Old Scone, a wonderful title, who was a Labour peeress who was appointed in 2000 to be the chief executive of the Environment Agency. And Baroness Young was very, very keen. She'd been had been president of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. She was a big wildlife fan. And can I say straight away that I also am a keen wildlife fan, having been watching birds all my life. So I'm not coming from some kind of wild right-wing anti-nature lobby. I'm totally committed to create, and I spend every winter I go down to the Somerset levels from where I live on a hill looking down on them, to see the amazing sight of millions of starlings which come from all over Europe to roost in the levels, and they roost in the reeds. And we accept, of course, that parts of the levels should be nature reserves and should be habitat for every kind of bird, and indeed every other kind of wildlife. One of the extraordinary things about this whole story is, of course, that in the name of flooding has been not only allowed but encouraged on the levels in recent years by the Environment Agency, by European directives, in the name of encouraging of making it a better habitat for wildlife. But of course, once you flood it to the extent it's been flooded for the last 8 weeks, under anything up to 6 or even more feet of water, that is the victims of this, and not just all those unhappy people we see on television having to wander around in wellies in their front rooms and seeing the devastation it's brought to their home life and their gardens and everything in their lives. But very high on the list of the victims now is massive devastation of wildlife. We've seen hundreds of, or we've heard of, we've been told of, not just hundreds of badgers being drowned, and water voles and all the other little creatures for whom the levels are home, but even the birds themselves that we're meant to be encouraging. If you flood ground nesting birds, if you flood somewhere where birds nest on the ground, whether they're snipe, redshank, ducks, whatever, if you keep the flood up long enough, which is what's happening, it's going to be devastating for all the birds as well. So we're looking at a multiple disaster, which has been created by what I've called a synergy between green ideologues in Britain, of whom Baroness Young was only the most famous, and she ran the Environment Agency for 8 years, and a set of European directives which are all pointing in the same direction, which say that we should not, in the name of promoting biodiversity and helping wildlife and creating habitats, we should increase the amount of flooding, and that is the result that we're looking at today on our television sets, or if we live in Somerset, seeing this amazing sight. I mean, it's very spectacular. You go to the top of the hill where I drive over to my local town of Wells, and you look out to the west, and you just see what looks like a huch, vast inland sea, a series of massive lakes covering, as I say, 65 square miles.
Yeah, we were actually down at Boroughbridge about 10 days ago or so, and you just come to the edge of the village, and it's like you've driven into a lake, and there's nothing to see except water.
Well, what you may not have known, Neil, because we've only discovered it in the last day or two, is that just right next to Boroughbridge, which is a very key place, because it's where the two of the main rivers, the Tone and the Parrett, join together, as you know. And we've seen those amazing pictures, which have been published in several newspapers now, and Richard North had them on his blog last week, showing what the River Parrett looked like, which is the main river taking it all to the sea, what it looked like back in the 1960s when it was still being dredged, and it was quite a wide and deep river. Then the second picture shows what it looks like, or has looked like recently, when there hasn't been any dredging, and you see that the river is absolutely silted up, clogged up with mud, and it's not only a much shallower river, but it's also a much narrower river. So in other words, the capacity of that river to take floodwater away has been dramatically reduced. Now, next to where you were in Boroughbridge, you will have seen a vast area of what is called the South Lake Moor. That is owned by Natural England, and that piece of water is deliberately kept. Natural England bought it so that it could be a good habitat for wildlife. Now, if you remember, back in November, the Met Office was telling everyone that we were going to have a drier than usual winter. So in order to, because they thought, well, we're not going to have a flood disaster this year, but we can allow the South Lake Moor to be absolutely full of water. What they weren't banking on, of course, is that come January, the rains came down even harder, and they have therefore their entire storage area for water, which is part of their whole system for keeping the levels properly managed. That lake was literally a vast lake, and therefore there was nowhere to store any more water that was coming down. So what it's done is there's been a knock-on effect all the way through this very, very sophisticated drainage system. So water from miles away no longer can get down to the river because this vast lake, which has been artificially created, they deliberately flooded it in December because they just thought they were going to need it was going to help them with drainage. And so what we're looking at is yet another part of what is really a deliberately man-made disaster. And of course, that is, we're not being told that. The official line is, we should have spent more money, or the government should have spent more money on flood defences. No, the government wasn't. It wasn't just that they were actually spending a lot of money on making the levels more liable to flooding and destroying the drainage system which has existed for 500 years.
Yeah, I mean, I did hear a report, I think it was yesterday, the day before, there was a couple of hundred horses as well that were in danger of dying because they basically couldn't get to them, or they were just stranded somewhere. Yeah, I mean, obviously, farm animals, horses, cows, sheep, I mean, they've had the farmers have had an absolutely terrible time, and we've seen these dramatic pictures of farm animals having to be moved off the levels. I mean, the one good thing, as everyone says about the whole of this disaster, is that it has brought the community together, not just in Somerset, but I mean, the fodder that they need now to feed their cattle and their animals. This has been coming down by the truckload from Scotland, from Norfolk, from Yorkshire. People all over the country are responding, and of course the people down on the levels are coming across incredibly well out of this, because they're not. They've been faced with a massive disaster, many of them for the third time running in 3 years. They've got some idea that it's a man-made disaster because of the failure to dredge the rivers, and they're all very familiar with that idea now. What they're not aware of, or only a very few of them will be, is that this flood has been deliberately created by the government. Well, I think that's the big elephant in the room, and it begs the question: what's going to happen when they do actually realise it has been absolutely deliberate, And we got an article from somebody down there in a consultancy, Clive Miller Associates, who's been involved with the council on these types of issues before, and he'd already written to them on that basis, saying that you needed to dredge this, blah blah, all this kind of stuff. And he was saying that a couple of years ago they were burning effigies of the Environmental Agency staff, and if they actually thought it was deliberate. I mean, it might not be the effigies that they're burning. I mean, I personally, if that happened to me 3 years running and I knew it was deliberate, I mean, you'd want somebody in prison for it.
Neil, unfortunately, one of the people responsible, Mr. Elliot Morley, who was the guy who set this policy in motion in 2005, has already been in prison because he stole a very large sum of money off the British taxpayer. So it would probably be quite good to see him back again. For this crime, but someone else, of course, who's been talking the most amazing rubbish on the BBC about this is another ex-jailbird called Chris Huhne, who's totally behind all these policies, although it wasn't his direct responsibility. But he of course believes that the world is very rapidly being threatened by global warming, and therefore we've got to accept that these things are going to be inevitable, and we've got to allow quite large chunks of the country to be sacrificed either to the sea or to the floodwater.
Well, I actually interviewed Natalie Bennett yesterday down in London, and she ripped off the mic and stormed off when this issue was brought up. But that's on film, so that'll be up. Well, it is up on YouTube at the moment. But yeah, I mean the whole even the Met Office can't even agree that this is to do with so-called climate change.
Absolutely, it's been fascinating to see the way that this amazing woman called Dame Julia Slingo, who's the chief scientist of the Met Office, she came out. She was one of the people who came out, as indeed did David Cameron right at the beginning of the year, as you remember, saying it's all to do with climate change and there's not much we can do about it. So, but there was the Met Office through the chief scientist saying, yes, it is global warming, the jet streams move because of whatever. She was firmly convinced that was the answer. And then the Met Office itself produced a report. Well, it actually reiterated a report it had already produced saying, well, no, actually, we can't link this to climate change. We really don't understand why it's happening. They didn't say that in so many words, but what they said it's due to various factors, including disturbance of the weather over Indonesia, as if that would affect what happens to the jet stream coming across the Atlantic. And the bottom line of what they were saying is we don't really know why the jet stream has moved south in the way it has in recent months, producing all this incredible rain. But again, you see, we're being told constantly this is the wettest winter on record. It simply isn't. It's the sixth, as we can see from the Met Office's own rainfall data going back to 1766, we can see that this is only the 16th wettest 3-month period we've had in all of those 250 years. So we're being told an awful lot of rubbish, but right at the heart of it is the fact that there was a belief, as there still is in many places, that the world was facing dramatic climate change thanks to global warming, and that we were going to have drier winters, and that we therefore needed to store water against the day when it wouldn't rain for months on end. And that was part of the thinking behind creating this huge lake which you saw at Boroughbridge the other day. It was meant to be a storage area for water that was going to also be helpful for wildlife. But it's turned out to be a disaster for everybody, including the wildlife.
Yeah, well, if you've got a storage area that's already full, then there's not an awful lot you can put in.
You've got the point, absolutely, Neil. That's the point. It was meant to be a storage area which, because the Met Office said in November that we were going to have a very dry period for the rest of the winter, they thought, well, that's fine, we can keep a lot of water there. But it didn't turn out like that. The Met Office, it is just astonishing how the Met Office every year for the last 5 years has predicted. If they predict it's going to be dry, and we're going to have a drought, it pours with rain. If they predict that it's going to be wet, they predicted, if you remember, in 2012, they predicted, or was it, beginning of that year, they predicted we were going to have a warmer than usual winter, and we had the coldest December on record. we are having extreme weather events, but then the fact is that people have got no sense of history. We always have had extreme weather events. Read the diaries of Samuel Pepys and John Evelyn back in the 17th century. They were constantly recording this is the hottest summer since, well, they didn't say since records began, but the hottest summer in the memory of man, or the coldest winter. And that's, the days when the Thames used to freeze over regularly. They were always being astonished by the fact that the weather, unfortunately, is not a nice, even, predictable thing, but it's constantly throwing up abnormal events.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember, I'm from Edinburgh, and I remember snow in July one year. And the day
76, was it? 75?
It was around that time, yeah.
75 it was. That was the day when a cricket match in Derbyshire was snowed off on the 2nd of June.
Yeah, well, this was in July in Edinburgh, I remember it.
That was in July, yeah. It may not have been the same year, but you're quite right. I mean, Neil, those of us who, well, some of us are rather older than others. I mean, I remember not only the great snow of 62-3, but I also remember the great snow of 46-7, which was, at that point, was the snowiest winter we'd had in the 20th century.
I mean, last year we had snow from November to May. I mean, the Greens certainly seem to have a very short memory in terms of global warming, when last year was freezing, and I think in March alone 35,000 people died in their homes because of the cold. But
of hypothermia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, we know that cold winters do kill far more people than hot summers. They still go on about the great European heat wave of 2003 as proof of global warming, but actually the number of people who died was outside was only 30. Well, I say only, it was 35,000. Well, that's the number that the medical records show. If we have a cold winter in the UK, that's the number that died just in Britain alone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole fallacy of a few degrees of temperature making a difference in the food supply and all the rest of it is I mean, but my own observation, I spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, where it can get down to minus 30 in the winter, and in the summer it's plus 45, 50, and there's food everywhere. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, one of the coldest period I've ever had, apart from Britain 2 years ago, was in Czechoslovakia in the old days. I was there in 1978-9, and the temperature, I remember, the temperature went down to about 26 degrees below. And I remember my Czech host's father saying he'd just been listening to the radio, and in Moscow it was minus 45. He was really pleased that it was actually a bit warmer in Prague than it was in Moscow. Anyway, you've lived there. I'm glad you've been in those parts.
Yeah. And as I say, it's still the same now. You get it's a 70-degree swing in temperature, and there's no shortage of food. That's for sure. Yeah,
no, it's a very good point you're making. Yeah.
Well, I mean, where do you see this going? I mean, I've read some reports that this weather could go until May. So there doesn't seem to be any end in sight for the poor people down in Somerset or other parts of the country as well. Yeah, well, of course, you say the other parts of the country. The other great disaster which has come to light, which I haven't written about actually, but I've been aware of it for some weeks now, is this extraordinary disaster on the Thames, which partly results from the fact they haven't dredged the Thames since 1996, because it costs too much thanks to EU regulations, according to the Environment Agency. They admitted it themselves. But we've also got this ludicrous thing of the Jubilee River, which was intended. It's an artificial... You know about this, do you, Neil? It's the river they've dug between Eton and Windsor, and it was designed to protect Maidenhead and Eton and Windsor. Okay. So they dug a river which joined one bit of the Thames to another bit lower down. So they have actually prevented flooding in the highly populated area around Windsor and Maidenhead. But what they've done is dumped all that excess water that results from the fact they haven't been dredging higher up right down on places like Wraysbury and Datchet and Chertsey. So that is also, they spent 110 million quid, the Environment Agency, on that. And they called it Jubilee River because it was opened in the year of the Queen's Golden Jubilee in 2002. And that's been the other major disaster area this winter. And again, it's a totally artificial disaster because there was no need for all that water to be suddenly dumped
without all those people in Wraysbury and Datchet.
So, in terms of Somerset, where you're based, I mean, when do you see this catastrophe, as it were? I mean, coming to an end, or is
the trouble is, as I say, I've said before, the Somerset levels have been used to a few weeks of flooding in quite a lot of years. They can live with that, because if it happens in the winter, it doesn't affect the way that the grass grows that all the cattle and the sheep need to eat. But if it goes on for months, they're not talking about the Somerset levels floods draining away until possibly April or May now. Now that's the point when the grass starts growing, and that means if you flood ground which has got grass growing on it, it can withstand flooding for a while, but it can't withstand it for months on end. And we had this back in 2012, where you had farmers on the levels who were having to pay hundreds of £800 or £1,000 a week just to feed their cattle because there was no grass growing, because it had all been killed off by the floodwater of the previous winter, which had hung around into the summer at the point where the grass couldn't grow because it just turned into a toxic mess of mud.
I read your Spectator article, and you mentioned Agenda 21 in there. I mean, this fits in nicely with that. If I may be so bold.
Agenda 21 is, you're quite right, and I mean, I'm glad to see that more and more people are beginning, and alas, not a majority of people, but quite a lot of people are realizing that way back in 1992 we had the first great World Climate Conference in Rio. And one of the things that came out of that was Agenda 21, and that was designed to promote biodiversity, i.e. more attention should be paid to creating, to helping nature and wildlife than, at least it should move right up to the top of our priority list. And that is what informs a lot of this legislation which has come out of the European Union, and of course our Environment Agency goes along with that, and very happily goes along with it. So Agenda 21 is something which really should become much, much more famous than it has been, because that is the big overarching kind of ideology which informs a hell of a lot of the legislation which we're now seeing the results of in the floods in across southern England.
Yeah, well, if you look on some of the council websites now, they have whole sections of their information on Agenda 21 itself and the local plan, etc. And I wrote to Hartsmere Council, where our offices are down in Pottersbar here, and asked them how much they were spending on it, because they had a whole page on the website detailing all the key points of it, and they said they only spent £1,000 on it, which
they
is
said what?
Nonsense.
Didn't they?
They said they only spent £1,000 on Agenda 21 programmes.
Oh, right, I see. Yes, but then you look at the background to a lot of the legislation coming down from the national level, and of course it's costing. And we're talking, it's probably cost us billions over the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
But the councils aren't saying, all they're saying is just £1,000.
Yeah.
Who can object to that? Well, I can tell you they spend a hell of a lot more than that on the Somerset levels alone, almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they intend to implement these biodiversity programmes, the deliberate flooding of certain parts of the country is
absolutely part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, if you work in government at any level and you're engaged in this sort of planning on these kind of issues, that you have to take notice of that. And you whether or not you say it's Agenda 21, that's what lies behind it all.
Yeah, which none of us ever voted for, of course.
No, we weren't given a chance to do that.
No. So, I mean, basically, do you see any end in sight for this in Somerset? What do you think is going to happen again next year?
I'm very, very worried. It is one hell of a mess. We've got Owen Patterson, the embroiled Environment Secretary, who's the only guy who's come up with any constructive thinking on this, and then he got waylaid by a media scrum and lots of protesters, and he became famous for being the man who arrived at the levels without any Wellingtons. He did have some boots at the back of his discovery, but when he arrived in this meeting media scrum, he couldn't even get around the back of his car to get his boots on. But actually, he's a real countryman, is Owen Patterson. He had talked to the local experts. The whole point of him coming to Somerset was not to do a photo opportunity like David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg, but to find out from the guys on the ground what actually had gone wrong and what needed to do, what was needed to put it right. So he came out with a plan. He came out with a request that all the people locally should get together, including the county council and the drainage boards and everybody, and work out a 20-year plan to make sure that we don't have a repeat of the disaster we've had increasingly over the last 3 years. And it starts with dredging, because that's vital. You've got to take the water away. But secondly, the drainage boards, which have been set up centuries ago to look after the local drainage and 1,000 miles of ditches, and some of them, as I say, are huge. And there's one called the King's Sedgemoor Drain. It's like a mighty river. And that was created, it was an entirely artificial thing to help the water to drain away from the levels out to the River Parrett and out to the Bristol Channel. And all that has been really completely screwed up in the last few years. And whether or not Mr. Patterson can get the whole policy reversed against the tide of European legislation is going to be a very interesting question. At the moment, however much he may have the political will to do it, he's up against a huge, great, clogged up silt mass of legislation, which is what has led to this disaster, and it's going to be a very interesting political battle to see whether we can actually get back to the days when the Somerset levels were drained and people could live there and farm there and have their businesses there, or whether we are actually going to have to give way in the name of some mad belief that climate change is going to make this kind of thing inevitable. And we've got to let the Sedgemoor and the Somerset levels go back to the sea and to turn into a marshy wilderness, which is what they were before before the monks in the Middle Ages started to drain them, and helped later by those Dutch engineers in the 17th century. I mean, Holland is a classic example. I mean, there is the country most famous in the world for having been once largely the sea, and 29% of Holland is under the sea level. And they have brilliantly reclaimed vast areas of land over the last hundreds and hundreds of years, and they know how to do it in Holland. And they're still affected by some of this European legislation. I mean, there have been big rows in Holland over the plans to dismantle coastal defences and let areas of land flood. But the fact is that the Dutch are a much more robust nation when it comes to this sort of thing. And they have spent literally billions and billions of pounds in recent years, making sure that most of Holland remains dry land and people can live there and farm there.
Well, absolutely, and the technology's been there for a long, long time to do that. So, it begs the question as to why we've not done it. I just wanted to...
Well, we did do it. We did do it, Neil. Of course, I mean, we keep on going back to the fact that the key people who drained the Somerset levels were Dutch engineers, because they already knew in the 17th century how to do it.
I just meant in terms of maintaining it at the moment.
In terms of the future, I wouldn't put money on our whole government machine, with the aid of Brussels in the background, being able to turn around this mighty supertanker, which is heading us towards a situation where the Somerset levels return to the Middle Ages.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way Brussels is going and the UN under Agenda 21, they want us all back in the Middle Ages, cycling bicycles and whatever. Yeah, they talked about bombing Afghanistan back to the Stone Age, didn't they? Well, what Brussels is doing, with the help of a lot of people in Britain, particularly in the Environment Agency, is to flood the levels back to the Middle Ages. Yep.
And at a hell of a price.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I totally agree with what you said there on the, admiring nature and take care of nature. I mean, I don't know anybody that would dispute that we should look after nature and all the rest of it. And this nonsense that Greens would come out with, saying that, you're anti-nature, you're anti-this, you're anti-that, it's nonsense. I mean, I don't know anybody either that would deny that climate changes. because it always has done. I mean, it's a nonsensical argument.
Yeah, what is really revealing is the way they say we are either anti-nature or we're anti-science, whereas in fact it's they who are doing harm to nature and they who are ignoring the science.
Well, exactly. I had this out with Natalie Bennett yesterday, and
you're a very brave man, Neil, to confront that dire woman.
Yeah, well, she did hang around for a long time because we have some very professional-looking equipment, and she obviously wanted to get in front of it. So she got what she deserved, really. But,
well, if that's the acceptable face of the Green movement, then what's the unacceptable face?
Well, I think we're well aware of that. Anyway, well, thank you for your time, Christopher. And
Neil, it's a pleasure to talk to you. It's always a delight to talk to people on radio who have got some considerable knowledge themselves and who therefore can live in the real world. Whereas, as you know, day after day from the BBC now, we get nothing but the most amazing rubbish. I've just been listening again to an interview that Chris Huhn did on Monday morning on the Today programme. And they also had For Balance. So we had Chris Huhn saying it's all to do with climate change, and that's one point of view. And therefore, For Balance, we'll have an engineer. And they wheeled on a guy from a firm, a huge engineering firm in London. If you look up their website, their main interest is in getting money out of renewables. They build wind turbines and solar panels. But we weren't told that by the BBC. We were given the impression we were having a balanced discussion, which, of course, it was absolutely nothing of the kind.
No. Well, as I say, Natalie Bennett can't have a balanced discussion either, or even a conversation about her ideology without it descending into farce, really. But anyway, we'll call a halt to it there. And
yeah, very good, Neil. Pleasure to talk to you. Okay, thanks.
Cheers now. Bye-bye. That was Christopher Booker of the Telegraph, and some very interesting points there, and hopefully we'll have him back on again.